We don't even have to worry about school stuff anymore, since Mom's not paying tuition. That was what my 11-year-old nephew said, completely by accident, over a plate of my mother's potato salad, on an ordinary Sunday afternoon, that wasn't anybody's birthday, wasn't anybody's anniversary, wasn't a single thing worth remembering. He said it the way kids say things, without any idea he was handing me a puzzle piece that didn't fit the picture I'd been paying $900 a month for the last 23 months to keep whole. My name is Camille Ortiz. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a dental hygienist in Boise, Idaho, which is not a job that makes anyone rich, but it's steady, and it's mine, and until that Sunday, I thought I understood exactly where every dollar of my modest, steady paycheck had been going for almost 2 years. I didn't say anything at the table. I want to be honest about that, because this isn't a story about me standing up in the middle of my mother's backyard with a plate in my hand and demanding answers. It's a much quieter story than that. I just filed the sentence away, the way you file away a splinter you can feel but can't quite see yet, and I kept eating my potato salad. And I want to tell you what I found when I finally went looking for it. Before I get into that, do me a favor. Tell me what time it is where you're watching this, and tell me honestly, are you the one in your family who always ends up quietly covering something? The car repair nobody else can swing this month, the extra hand with the kids, the thing that gets asked of you because you're the one who says yes without making it a whole production. I have a feeling more of you are than you'll admit in the comments, but I'd like to know anyway. I'll back up 2 years, to the phone call that started all of it. My older sister Dana is 39. Growing up, she was the one who got the solo in the recital and the room with the good window, and I don't say that with any bitterness left in it. That's just how our family worked, and I made my peace with it a long time ago. Dana married a good, quiet man named Kyle Pruitt when she was 26. They have 2 kids, Milo, who's 11 and narrates his own life like a nature documentary, and Josie, who's 7 and mostly communicates in questions about dinosaurs. They send their kids to a small Catholic school across town, the kind with a uniform and a tuition bill that arrives twice a year like a weather event. Growing up, I was the one who kept track of things, whose turn it was to feed the dog when the electric bill was due the summer our mom was between jobs, which of Dana's school forms needed a signature by Friday. I don't say that to make myself sound like a saint at age 9. I think some kids just get cast into the role of the reliable one early, the way Dana got cast into the role of the one who needed looking after, and by the time you're both adults, the casting has hardened into something that feels less like a choice and more like just who you are. So when Dana called me crying 2 years ago, some old, familiar part of me answered before the rational, 32-year-old part of me even got a vote. 2 years ago, Dana called me on a Tuesday night, and I could hear in the first 4 words that something was wrong. Kyle's hours had gotten cut at the plant where he worked. Not laid off, just cut. The kind of thing that doesn't make headlines, but quietly rearranges a family's whole budget. She was crying. Actually crying, which Dana almost never does, and she told me they were behind on Milo and Josie's tuition, and the school had sent a letter about a payment plan, and she didn't know who else to ask, and she was so embarrassed to even be asking me. I said yes before she finished the sentence. That's just who I am, and for a long time I thought that was a good thing about myself. Uncomplicated, no asterisks. I offered to set up a direct transfer straight to the school's tuition portal, not to Dana's account, to the school itself, because I wanted the money to go exactly where it was supposed to go and nowhere else, and because I'm the kind of person who likes a paper trail even when I'm not expecting to need one. I logged into the parent portal myself, with Dana's permission, set up a recurring $900 transfer on the 15th of every month, and got an email confirmation that I saved, out of habit, in a folder I never expected to open again. Just until things stabilize, Dana said. A few months, tops. I believed her. I still believe she meant it, that first Tuesday night. I don't think Dana sat down 2 years ago and planned any of what I'm about to tell you. I think what happened is much smaller and much more common than that, and in some ways that makes it harder to talk about, not easier. The few months turned into a year. I stopped planning the Portland trip I'd been saving for. I kept driving a car with a check engine light I'd been meaning to deal with for longer than I want to admit. None of that was a tragedy. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't destitute. I was just quietly smaller than I would have been otherwise, the way you get smaller a little at a time when you're the one holding a corner of something up and nobody else seems to notice the weight has shifted onto you specifically. Every so often, I'd ask Dana how tuition was going, half hoping to hear it had gotten easier. "You have no idea," she told me once, laughing a little, tired. "Private school is a scam, honestly." I took that at face value. Why wouldn't I? She was my sister. I had the bank confirmations. I had no reason to think the story I'd been told in month 1 had quietly stopped being the story sometime around month 12. There was one moment, months before the potato salad, that I've thought about a lot since. Dana posted a handful of photos from a long weekend at a lake house with the kids. Nothing extravagant, just a rental, sun and life jackets and a grill, captioned something about how they'd needed a reset after a hard spring. I remember feeling a small, uncharitable flicker of confusion, the kind you talk yourself out of before you've even finished having it. I almost texted her something like, "Oh, that looks like fun. Glad things are looking up," half hoping she'd say something about the tuition easing off too. I didn't send it. I told myself it wasn't my business how she spent whatever money wasn't going to school fees, and that a family who's struggling is still allowed one good weekend, and both of those things are true, and I still wish, looking back, that I'd let myself ask the small, boring question right then instead of a year later. Then came the Sunday with the potato salad, and Milo's nature documentary narration of his own family's finances, and the sentence that didn't fit. I want to tell you what I did next, because I think it matters as much as what I found. I didn't call Dana that night and ask her what Milo meant. I didn't want to ambush her with an 11-year-old's half-understood comment and get an explanation shaped entirely around defending herself before I even knew what I was asking about. So I sat with it for a few days instead, the way I sit with most things, and then I did something much simpler and much more boring than a confrontation. I went back through my own email and found the folder I'd saved 2 years earlier, the original confirmation from when I'd set up the transfer myself, with the school's account number and their front office contact listed right there on the portal receipt. I called the school. Not Dana, the school. I told the woman who answered that I was listed as an authorized payer on the Pruitt tuition account and that I wanted to confirm the balance was current, which was true, and which is exactly the kind of boring, plausible question a school office fields probably every week. She pulled up the account, made a small friendly sound, and said, "Oh, you're all set. They've actually been on the Founders Scholarship since last spring, full tuition, so there shouldn't be anything owed at all." Since last spring. I did the math sitting in my car in the school's own parking lot because I'd driven over instead of calling from home, which tells you something about how much I needed to hear a real person say it out loud rather than read it off a screen. 11 months. For 11 months, Milo and Josie's tuition had been fully covered by a scholarship, and for 11 months, my $900 a month had kept leaving my account and landing somewhere that was no longer the tuition portal at all, because once the scholarship covered the balance, the school's own system had started returning any tuition designated overpayment straight back to the account holder, which was Dana, not the school, and not me. 23 months of transfers, 11 of those months by the school's own account, weren't paying for anything at all. That's $9,900 that didn't go where I'd been told it was going. I didn't cry in that parking lot, though I want to tell you honestly I came close. Mostly what I felt was something quieter and colder settling into place. The same feeling, I imagine, as finally understanding a word you've been mishearing your entire life. I thought back over the last 11 months with that new information sitting on top of it like a filter, the slightly newer car in Dana's driveway that she'd mentioned, finally treating themselves to, the pool membership Milo had brought up at Thanksgiving, unprompted, the way kids do, the conversation just 2 weeks before the potato salad Sunday, where Dana had called to ask, almost offhand, whether I could maybe bump the transfer to $1,000 a month, because summer camp for the kids had gotten expensive this year, and could I swing the extra 100? I'd said I'd think about it. I'm glad now that I hadn't said yes yet. I sat with all of it for about 2 weeks. I want to be honest that I'm not naturally a confrontational person, and some of that 2 weeks was just me working up to doing something instead of nothing, the way I imagine a lot of people do, right before they finally act on something they've known for a while but hadn't let themselves fully look at. But I also want to tell you that the 2 weeks weren't wasted time. I used them to decide, carefully, what I actually wanted to do, instead of reacting in the moment the way I might have if I'd called Dana straight from that parking lot. Some nights during those 2 weeks I was furious, in the quiet, contained way I get furious, which mostly looks like scrubbing a kitchen counter that's already clean. Other nights I found myself making excuses for her before she'd even had the chance to make them for herself. Maybe the school's records were wrong. Maybe there was a second account I didn't know about. Maybe I was about to feel very foolish for jumping to the worst version of this. I let myself sit in all of it without picking a version to believe yet, because I've learned that the story you land on in the first angry hour is rarely the one that holds up a week later. What I kept coming back to, underneath all of it, wasn't really the money. It was the fact that I'd asked her directly, more than once, how tuition was going, and she'd had a real, live opportunity to tell me the truth, and had chosen a joke about private school instead. That was the part that didn't soften no matter how many nights I sat with it. What I decided was simple. I wasn't going to call her and demand an explanation. I wasn't going to post anything, tell the rest of the family first, or make it a whole event. I was just going to stop. On a Tuesday morning, the same day of the week Dana had first called me, though I didn't plan that, I only noticed it afterward, I logged into my bank, found the recurring transfer I'd set up 2 years earlier with my own hands, and canceled it. No message, no warning. I didn't owe an announcement for stopping something I'd never actually owed to begin with. Then I did one more thing, a small thing, but it mattered to me more than I expected. I opened the retirement account I'd been neglecting since I started making those transfers, the one with the same $1,700 sitting in it for 2 years, because there was never anything left over to add to it, and I set up a new recurring contribution. $900 a month, the exact same number, redirected toward the only person who'd actually been consistently overlooked in this whole arrangement, which, it turned out, was me. 12 days later, Dana called. She sounded confused, not accusatory. That came a little later. She said the transfer hadn't gone through this month, and did I know if something was wrong with my bank, because the tuition payment was late, and the office had sent a note. I let her finish. Then I told her, as calmly as I could manage, that I knew about the scholarship, that I'd called the school myself, 2 weeks earlier, and that I knew it had started the previous spring. There was a long silence on the line, long enough that I actually checked to see if the call had dropped. When she spoke again, she tried a few different things, one after another, the way people do when they're improvising instead of explaining. It wasn't as bad as it sounded. She'd meant to tell me. The camp fees were real, the car needed work too. Things had just gotten complicated, and she hadn't known how to bring it up without it turning into exactly this. I let her get through all of it without interrupting. Then I told her the only thing I actually wanted her to hear. I'm not angry that you needed help 2 years ago, I said. I believed you then, and I still believe you meant it then. I'm just done pretending confusion is generosity. That's all this is. It's not a punishment, it's just over. She didn't have a response to that. We hung up not exactly on good terms, but not in a screaming match either. Just 2 sisters who both knew something had changed, and neither of us fully ready to say what came next. I didn't expect what happened 4 days after that. Kyle called me, not Dana, Kyle, my brother-in-law, who I don't think has ever called me on his own in the 9 years he's been married to my sister. He sounded embarrassed before he'd even said what he was calling about. He told me he hadn't known the scholarship had overlapped with my payments for that long. Dana had told him, back when the scholarship first came through, that I'd insisted on continuing to help with other costs, extracurriculars, uniforms, things the scholarship didn't cover, and he'd taken her word for it and never thought to ask me directly. When Milo mentioned the scholarship offhand, and word eventually got back to him about my phone call to the school, he'd done his own version of what I did, sat with it, then quietly did the math himself. "I'm not calling to make excuses for her," he said. "I just wanted you to know I didn't know, and I want to start paying some of it back. Not all at once, but something, every month, starting now, and I'd rather Dana not know yet, if that's all right, because I want this to actually happen and not turn into another conversation about who said what." I hadn't asked him for a dime. I told him that. He said he knew, and that was exactly why he wanted to do it. I want to tell you honestly that this wasn't a clean, tidy ending. Dana and I didn't have a tearful reconciliation scene the following week. There was a real, cold stretch for a couple of months, where we mostly communicated through our mother, the way sisters sometimes do when neither one is ready to be the first to fully soften. Our mom, to her credit, never once tried to tell me I was wrong or tried to smooth it over on Dana's behalf. She just said, one afternoon on the phone, "I raised you to be generous, not to be a bank account," and then didn't bring it up again, which is about as close as my mother gets to a full endorsement of anything I do. Kyle's monthly payments started quietly and stayed quiet for a while, a fraction of what I'd put in, but steady, and always with a short, plain text, never an explanation, just a number and a thank you. It was Kyle's payments, in the end, that made the whole thing impossible for Dana to keep managing on her own terms. About 3 months in, she found out. I don't know exactly how, and I never asked, and instead of getting angrier, something in her seemed to finally give way. She called me, and for the first time in the whole 2 years, she didn't lead with an explanation. She led with, "I'm sorry." Just that, at first. We talked for a long time after that, longer than we had in years, honestly, and she told me things about the last 2 years I hadn't known, how ashamed she'd been to still need help a year after she'd said it would be temporary, how the scholarship news had felt less like relief and more like one more thing she didn't know how to admit to me without unraveling the whole story she'd been telling both of us. I don't think that excuses it. I told her that too, but I understood it a little better after hearing it, and understanding it made it easier to let the anger settle into something quieter. Dana has been paying me back too, now, on her own, alongside Kyle, slower, smaller amounts, but consistent, and she's never once asked me to consider it even. I haven't. I don't think I need to. What matters more to me is that Milo mentioned, a few months ago, completely unprompted, that his parents had sat him and Josie down and explained, in kid terms, why saying thank you to people who help you matters even after the help isn't needed anymore. I don't know exactly what that conversation looked like. I know it happened because of a sentence he said by accident over potato salad, and I think that's a strange, small kind of grace, if you're willing to see it that way. I took the Portland trip this spring, finally, with the money that used to disappear on the 15th of every month. I sat on a bench by the river on my second morning there, with a coffee that cost more than I would have let myself spend 2 years ago, and I didn't think about Dana or Kyle or the school or any of it. I just sat there and watched a rowing team cut through the water in perfect, unhurried lines, and it occurred to me that I couldn't remember the last time I'd spent a whole hour not calculating something. It was mine, that hour. Nobody needed it more than I did, and for the first time in a long time, nobody was waiting on the other end of it. If I'm honest with you, the thing I keep coming back to isn't the $9,000, or the phone call to the school, or even Kyle's quiet monthly texts. It's how easy it was for 2 years to let being needed stand in for being told the truth, because I wanted so badly to be the kind of sister who shows up that I stopped checking whether I was still actually needed in the way I'd been told. Helping someone once is not a debt they get to keep collecting on forever. Being confused about where your money is going is not the same as being generous with it, and loving your family does not require you to keep paying for a story after it's stopped being true. So let me ask you honestly, the way I've had to ask myself since that Sunday. If you found out today that the reason you started helping someone had quietly stopped being real 11 months ago and nobody had told you, would you have kept sending it anyway, the way I almost did, just to avoid the phone call that finally stopped it? Thank you for watching. This story is fictional, written for reflection and entertainment, and any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental. If you take one thing from it, let it be this. The people who quietly keep paying, in every sense of that word, deserve the truth more than they deserve your gratitude for not noticing. Ask the boring question. Call the school. You're allowed to check.